For the benefit of all our participants who are blind or have visual impairments, we ask anyone who speaks, all of our speakers, to please begin with a short self-description. So I am Zukiswa. I am a brown African woman. I'm wearing a hat with dreadlocks sticking out at the bottom. I'm sitting in my office on a sunny, hot day. Our dialogue today is the first of two events focused on the elections. I think we're all well aware, and I think that's really why we're excited for the discussions, is that it's the year of the elections, essentially, with 49% of the world's population taking part in national elections. It really is an important milestone year for many. Many are, earmarked to be watershed events across our 64 countries where elections will be held. In some countries, as we've seen, democratic elections remain fair and free, while in others, elections are mired with violence, internet shutdowns, voter suppression, a lack of transparency, and quite often mis- or disinformation campaigns. For many, elections represent a test that measures the strength of respective democracies and resilience of democratic structures, of which citizen participation and agency is fundamental. Undoubtedly, the dominance of technological tools and platforms in our globalized economy, as well as the omnipresence, will be a key influence on the electorate, and of course on the electoral process as a whole across our context. So it's clear to us all, and I think it's been evident for a while, that tech tools can be used for good and for bad, for destructive reasons and for constructive reasons. In this dialogue, we're going to explore the tools that help democracies thrive, as well as tools that threaten the existence of our democracies globally. Our panel today will explore the challenges that are experienced during the election period, as well as the tech tools that are used or can be used to help us overcome those challenges. So that's really the core of our discussion today. We're also looking to share case studies from their region and talk about what has worked for and what has worked against our democratic principles as far as tech tools are concerned. So without any further ado and anything further from my end, I'm excited to introduce to you our speakers. We're really delighted to have our panel today. We have Yvonne Iweka Ojiemo from the Co-Creation Hub in Nigeria. We will share each of our speakers' bios in the chat so that you can look at their longer intros. So I'll just really briefly introduce each of our speakers before I open the floor. Yvonne is a social development professional and an adept social innovator, and she's really passionate about development for social change, which I think is really great. Robin Pasensi is from My Vote Counts in South Africa. And Robin is a researcher at a non-governmental organization called My Vote Counts, and her work focuses on the broad thematic area of money and politics. Keen to hear about the civic tech interventions from My Vote Counts, Robin. Cassie Cladis is from Tactical Tech, my apologies, in Germany, in Berlin. And Cassie is a project coordinator at the Influence Industry Project, which is run by Tactical Tech. And it's an international NGO that promotes critical thinking and proactive responses through digital and media literacy interventions. Welcome to all three of you, Yvonne, Robin, and Cassie. And as just a reminder, please do begin with a self-introduction. Yvonne, should we begin? Should we hand over to you to kick us off with a bit of an intro?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Yvonne. I'm wearing a white blouse. I'm a brown-skinned African woman on a dreadlocks. Today, I'll be sharing insights with you, like the moderator has rightly said. And I want to say thank you for this opportunity to be part of this awesome panel. I work at the Tech and Society practice of Co-Creation Hub. Co-Creation Hub is a innovation center dedicated to accelerating social capital for social development. And at my practice at Co-Creation Hub, at the Tech and Society practice, we work across three thematic areas, which is elections and governance, digital security, and threat intelligence. We also have a civic tech project, which we run at the governance and election unit called GoVote. It's a tool that is used to empower citizens to be able to participate in the electoral process. Basically, using the tool to engage citizens on advocacy, on how they can cast their vote, and also helping them to regularize their voters registration to be eligible to vote during election, whether at the federal, state, or the local government level in Nigeria. We also will be scaling this project across different locations in Africa, because Co-Creation Hub is a Pan-African organization. We have offices in Rwanda, Kenya, and Namibia, also aside from the Nigeria office where I reside. I'm joining you today from my office. It's a sunny day and I'm happy to be here. The influence of technology on democratic election in Africa cannot be overemphasized. And this is because technology has proven to enhance democratic process from the several elections that have held in Africa, like the Nigeria election that held, the election in Kenya that also held. Technology helps to raise awareness. Technology helps to boost voter regularization process, like we have seen. For us at Go, during the electoral process, we were able to use our Civic Tech tool, and with the help of technology, to get a lot of young people on board to be accredited, to be eligible to vote for the election. So I would like to say that technology is a very great tool that is helping us, enhance the democratic process. Although there are also challenges that comes with technology, which I'll be sharing in the course of the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks, Yvonne. Robin, if we could hear from you next, please. You can have your camera on and join us.
Thank you so much, Suki, and hello and welcome to everybody who is joining us, particularly our international audience. My name is Robin Pesensi. I am a brown woman from Cape Town in South Africa. I have very short black or brown, almost black looking curly hair, and I'm very excited to be with you all today. The organization that I represent is an NGO called My Vote Counts. And our work is situated in the very broad area of democracy, particularly across three specific thematic areas. What we call intra-party democracy, so how political parties or institutions function internally, understanding how democratic or undemocratic that is, and that's just to better understand if they will be able to govern effectively in a democracy. Secondly, we have work on electoral reform. And thirdly is the platform or theme that I am engaged on, and that is the area of money in politics. Now, Zuki and Yvonne, for that matter, have both already mentioned the significance of this conversation in a broad context of worldwide elections that are taking place. Particularly in Africa, we have a number of elections that are taking place this year, and of course in South Africa as well. And I don't have to overstate the use of technology in our lives. One doesn't need to be an expert to understand that we use technology every single day. And given this particular zeitgeist, it is important when we have something as pivotal as democratic elections taking place that we understand the interplay between these two things. And for my sort of input, my initial provocations, I would just like to situate my arguments within the understanding of access to information and where we can have digital technology, particularly civic technology, helping to make access to information easier. So in the South African context, this will be 30 years since our first democratic elections in 1994. And it's seen by many as a watershed moment for the country. We continue to have issues bridging the gap between racial tensions, for example, feelings of an undivided country. There is high unemployment, crime, and in surveys like those done by Afrobarometer, decreasing trust in government and democratic institutions. So it's a really crucial moment that we have people engaging with their democracy and, of course, just going out there to vote. So for the organization My Vote Counts, we have always, since our inception, focused on access to information. It's actually a constitutional right in South Africa. It's enshrined in our constitution that you should have access to information that is necessary for the exercising of your right to vote and to make informed political decisions. So in order to go out and participate in your democracy, to vote, it's actually very clearly linked with this principle of access to information. But when there's so much out there, how can you actually effectively make this happen? And this is where civic technology can really come into play. So for My Vote Counts, we are focused on providing civic tech in the space of money in politics. So some of you may already be aware, but just for those who are not, South Africa in the past 5 to 7 years, it's really been gripped by the issue of state capture, where the issue of private interests and money was allowed to capture members of our executive, democratic institutions, and just overall political decision-making that severely undermined the functioning of our democracy. So as a number one, as a kind of a stop against that happening and to provide that, we have a civic tech that's called Whose Vote Counts, kind of a play on this idea that your vote could be bought out by somebody who's quite literally spending more money on this. And our particular civic tech tool allows users to see who is privately funding our political parties. So if you go onto the Whose Vote Counts website, you can look at very nicely tracking for the past 2 years, who are the major donors to political parties, what industries do they represent. In South Africa, some of the major industries that seem to have a stake in our politics are represented by donors in the mining and the energy sector. You can see what percentage of that money makes up total donations. So, for example, a key trend that we have been able to see with our civic tech, with this dashboard, is that in South Africa, we have a very small pool of elite donors who make up somewhere between 50% to 70% of the total private funding that a political party gets. So in other words, if these elite group of people were to pull out of South African politics, we would have a major issue in how these political parties will be able to function. So we can look at civic technology, for example, in the space of access to information as being really pivotal, not only in the run-up to elections, but even outside of that, because it allows users to be able to see what their political representative is doing. It gives you access to information that you could choose to vote or not vote, or to politically agitate in whichever direction you feel appropriate. But just in my closing comments before the next speaker takes over, I would also just like to mention that it is difficult to actually map how civic technology could properly take hold in a society that is as highly unequal as South Africa. So we generally do have issues of access to equipment, laptops, even cell phones, data, internet. And so I think as part of the conversation, there should also be what are the parallel processes that can be used in support of digital technologies. But I will close there, Zuki, and yeah, looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Robin. It's always difficult to cut people off, but very fascinating, and looking forward to hearing more from both yourself and Yvonne. And before that, let's hear from Cassie. Cassie, please put your camera on and join us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie. I'm a white woman with brown hair and sort of large black headphones. I want to say thank you to the ICS Center for having me today, and also to Robin and Yvonne for sharing so much of your work so far. Yes, I'm the project coordinator for the Influence Industry Project at Tactical Tech, which is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Berlin, Germany. The Influence Industry Project is focused on examining and sharing knowledge about the influence industry, which is a global network of private companies that are involved in the collection and use of personal data in political communications during and leading up to political elections. So these private firms can include companies that send targeted ads to social media profiles, companies that create audiences based on online habits, or even companies that actually collect the data from online. So in our project, we've identified 17 tools that are used by this industry in their creation of data-driven targeted political messaging, which is quite a mouthful. In the 6 years that we've been running this project, we've seen the gaps that exist in public knowledge and about how the industry works, including facts like how widespread this industry is, the techniques that are used, and also what data is even available. So we hope that by sharing our findings and resources, as well as highlighting other organizations and other investigators around the world who are doing work on these topics, we can help contribute to the discussion between policymakers, journalists, and voters as well. So the question that I think we're talking about today, very simplified, is if technology is overall good or bad for democracies. But I think that technology, as a very broad term, is just a tool and one that requires examination, which is what we're all doing today, so very pleased. What's important is our approach in our thoughtful use of technology in democratic processes, such as elections. So in our work, technology can aid in keeping elections transparent. So one of our major initiatives is our interactive Explorer database. In this database, we track over 500 companies who are connected to this influence industry. And we support all of those companies, all of our findings, by primary and secondary sources. And similar actually to Robin's Whose Vote Counts project, by tracking these parties and these candidates spending on these digital influence companies and tools, we want to start showing, giving people something to point to and talk about and provide clear examples. And to conduct this work, we need digital technology, such as open source registration databases, electoral financial spending and donation databases, social media transparency initiatives like the Facebook ad library, and we use a number of online archive tools as well. On the other hand, the speed and pervasive nature of technology can also be applied to elections in ways that might create difficulties in tracking transparency. So one example can be the unofficial distribution networks that are used. In 2020, we worked with the Center for Democracy and Development, based in Nigeria, to do a country study about the influence industry in that context. One of the findings was about the use of informal support networks. I think now we can also say influencers, who are able to operate outside of the formal spending processes. So from my understanding, a party or a candidate can unofficially pay or give patronage to groups or individuals in communities to spread messages of support, or even run negative campaigns without necessarily having to report it due to this gray zone in some third-party spending. But this, though I'm using an example from one of our partner in Nigeria created, this is a global complex topic. We have case studies and country studies from over 25 countries examining the exact same theme. So while unofficial support networks are not new, through digital technologies and informal messages, these informal messages can now reach larger audiences, and they're difficult to trace the sources back. So these are tools that can be communication tools that can be applied in a variety of ways. And all the tools that we use during elections need to be up for informed and public debates at every level of society, for many reasons, including lack of information, lack of accountability, and even consistent global media and also digital literacy education. We, as a global community, are often left without the necessary information to approach this topic and to really debate about how we want digital technology to be applied to communications during our elections. So that's a little bit about our work and our hope and like the goal of our work. And I'm curious and excited for the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Excellent, great. Thank you, Cassie, and yeah, thanks to all three of our panelists. So also seeing some interesting conversation in the chat. Our next part now, we're going to ask all three of our panelists to come back onto the panel and have their videos on and essentially have a conversation between themselves and ask questions. I imagine that across each of your work areas, there are things that are being illuminated by your colleagues on the panel. So yeah, please feel free to just kick us off on that conversation, after which we will have an opportunity for questions from the floor to be shared with our panelists. So yeah, Robin, Cassie, Yvonne, please go for it. Who would like to ask a question first?
Actually, I would. Cassie, something really interesting because it's actually a conversation that came up amongst my work colleagues today, and this is the space of influencers, particularly on TikTok, as a new site of political spending. And in our context, in our current legislation, we do not accommodate that kind of political spending at all. And I'm just interested from you is, in the spirit of sort of like influencer networks, do you think the concern is more that it's going to be a site of mis and disinformation, particularly in the run-up to elections? So you're going to see kind of like a targeted attempt at creating these pools of like influencers, let's say on a space like TikTok, to push a certain narrative? Or do you think the concern is more that you will get spending to these spaces that are unaccounted for and coming from places that we don't really know?
Thanks, Robin. That's a great question. I think I have personal concerns, and then there's also the concerns of the project. And I think, being able to track the spending and to track who is being engaged officially on as an official capacity from a political party, I think that's hugely important. And not to play one platform off of another or anything, but Meta products have done a lot with, having to track what is an official messaging from a candidate, and other platforms, using TikTok as an example, there is no official political messaging allowed on that platform. And so in a sense, they're trying to say, look, we don't want it to be political, but in reality, that probably doesn't happen. And it just makes it more difficult to be able to track who is paid or not paid. So I would say our concern is much more about just being able to keep it transparent for people to track and to know who's on the payroll, essentially, versus knowing or trying to judge what's being said or not said.
Okay, so like a similar way to how you have to declare kind of if it's an ad on Instagram, we just wanted to have a sea of transparent interactions, as it were, and then you can decide whether you want to go with this or not. I
think so, from my view. And actually, and I'm sorry, Robin, I had a question for you as well, because you were talking about, so our work is based so broad. There's so many influencers and companies and countries, and then you're working with such a small group of donors. And what was the reaction like when you published the Whose Vote Counts tool?
From civil society, really good. The political response, not so much. And that was actually on trend for the entire sort of process around private funding information. In the South African context, it's taken, I would say, over 2 decades to have dedicated legislation about private funding. And this is partly where we source the information that you see on the tool. And throughout that sort of decades-long process, political parties were not happy at the at the prospect of this. And so something like the Whose Vote Counts tool, I would say probably not. We've seen a lot of take up from journalists who use it in the reporting, which was one of our explicit goals. But I will say it is limited somewhat because we are trying to push it out more publicly so we can get people on board. But yeah, it is very niche.
Yeah, so I would like to contribute to what Robin and Cassia said. For us at GoVote, we believe that educating and empowering citizens through advocacy with the right tools will help us move faster with technological tools for democratic engagement. We believe that yes, the focus is on technology. There are different technological tools, but there are still a section of the population which might be likely skipped in our engagements, in our day-to-day activities as electoral champions. So for example, in the Nigeria 2023 election, where technology was deployed, and also the recently conducted elections in Kenya, we saw the role that technology played in terms of voters' awareness, in terms of integrity and accountability, transparency. It sort of boosted people's confidence in the process. We are not where we ought to be, but people sort of saw a progress from previous elections in these countries that I'm using as a classical example. So, for example, during the Nigeria electoral process, the PVAS was used for accreditation. There was a viewing portal where people can access results real time as they come in from the polling units. But in the process of transmission of result, a lot of things still happened because we saw the human factor playing in. So there is that negative part of technology, which has shown that the human factor can actually manipulate technology to undermine democratic process. And being that a lot of nations will be going to elections in this year 2024, which we have all termed the year of democracy, it is important to pay attention to these things such that technology is not used to undermine democracy. For example, I would like to say that there are bots, there are chat bots, there are social media platforms that people use to engage. We have also seen that during this election, there were political micro-targeting of people. There were political advertisement from candidates, from political parties, just to sort of confuse people on how to make up their mind on who to vote, who is the eligible candidate. I feel like technology is very important for our political advancement, but at the same time, if not properly deployed, it could be used to undermine democracy. And it will be interesting to just monitor the trend in the different elections that are coming up this year to see how even AI as a tool can be used to influence our political space to sort of, especially the voters, because, for example, they are usually the tool in the hand of the political class. So that's why as technology advances, there is need for more citizens' engagement to understand these digital tools, how to engage them and what not to do. And also in terms of data mining, we've seen that there are trends of what should I use now? There are trends that suggest that there could be a lot of AI manipulation going on during this election. For example, people use meeting assistants during meetings unauthorized. If, for example, the electoral bodies are not they're not diligent with what their preparation processes are, there might be information links that could compromise elections. So I'm just curious to know from Robin and Cassie, for underserved communities who might not have access to these information that we are discussing here, because most times it seems that it's at the urban centers and at the cities that most of these conversations are happening. It's not trickling down to underserved communities. It's not trickling down to people who are not so literate. How can we ensure that the technological tools we are pushing for to enhance our democratic process is the people in the grassroots are carried along? I just wanted to hear from both perspectives. Robin, you can go first.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I must say, I agree with your sentiments as well. That I think digital technology does offer an opportunity to really amplify elections, democracy work in general, and it can be used for good. And I think Cassie mentioned this as well. But obviously, we can't ignore that there is a side to it. And my particular passion project is around the mis and disinformation that can be disseminated. For example, with your deep fakes, digital technology that can really undermine democracy and election work. But to your point, particularly, Yvonne, and that's what I mentioned towards the end of my opening comments, is that in South Africa, for example, we are a highly unequal society. Access is an issue. Not everyone is going to be working with digital technology. Even though we may feel that social media usage is ubiquitous, for example, it really isn't. Even what social media platforms are used, some people may say, well, TikTok is where everybody's at. In South Africa and on the rest of the continent, for example, Facebook is also still widely used, for example. And at least for my vote counts, it's really important that we pair sort of digital work with in-person, on-the-ground work. So, for example, in South Africa, community radio is really big. We have 11 official languages. Community radio is really important for disseminating information to outlying rural communities, just communities that are not in the metropole, as it were, and they can access information that way. Community newspapers also really important. And then also, we mustn't forget that we must also be focusing on in-person work, workshops, seminars. They can seem rather labor intensive, and you need a bit of resources to actually go out into these communities. But if we don't do that and we solely rely on the access to digital technology or digital information, we are cutting out a large swathe of the population. And it's really important to bring them in the more sort of traditional ways of interaction.
Thank you, Robin, and Yvonne also for that question. I think it's a really important part of the conversation that cannot be overlooked. So there's two things I would say. I mean, I think, on the one hand, I think even people who might use digital technology every single day are not immune or are not immune to some of the maybe misinformation or maybe some of the I don't want to say tricks, but some of the techniques that are used that are manipulative or that can be misleading. And I think that that's a problem for users of technology around the world who have daily access to infrastructure and who don't. I think that's just a big gap that we have. And I think that's a problem, is that maybe just through daily interaction, some populations probably in, countries with lots of infrastructure, that they are immune to these techniques, and they're not. And we're seeing the impacts of that, I think, around the world. But then also, Robin, what you were saying as well about different, about different methods of influence. Yeah, like social media gets a big part, but also what happens on Messenger, what happens on WhatsApp, what happens on Telegram, what happens on just like robocalls or getting text messages from a politician or from a candidate. We did one case study, and there was a political candidate that would send people text messages on their birthdays. And that was a hugely popular thing that this candidate would do, because they said, oh, wow, people like this candidate knows me and cares about me. Where did they get that information on their birthdays? Where did they get their phone numbers? So there's multiple ways that, you know, digital influence can show up beyond, I think social media gets huge like airtime, and it is a big topic, of course, to be sure, but I think that making sure that we're including experiences, voices, and narratives that are outside of social media, Robin and Yvonne, which you were both highlighting, I think is so important because it's not a one-size-fits-all industry. So thank you both so much for highlighting that. And if we have time, I have a question for Robin, but if we're out of time for this section, we can move on.
I'm a terrible
Oh,
facilitator.
sorry.
I want to contribute.
I'm struggling to hold all of you wonderful humans back on this panel, but I will have to. If we do have time at the end, perhaps we can. I'm very keen that we also surface questions from our participants. Thanks. Yeah, and really great interaction between yourselves. I think let's stay on. So our next session now, let's just briefly at responding to questions from our audience. Some are questions that emerged prior to the session, so when people were registering. What I will do, because I can tell given our time, we are not going to get through all the questions, but what I do want to do, much younger humans than me use the term shout out, but the questions, I just want to mention who we received questions from, and I just want to show appreciation for everyone who did share some reflections. I don't think we will get to all of them, but we'll get as far as we can. Our questions came from Ochieng at Transform Empowerment for Action Initiative, from Susie at Care International, from Yasmin at the Civic Tech Innovation Network, from Henry at the African Election Observers Network, from Iwan, it possibly is Iwan or Iwan, from the International NGO Forum on Indonesian Development, from Arome or Arome from the Center for Learning and Development, from Gentry at the Good Health Organization, from Ducky at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung Foundation. I do think there was someone from that foundation on the call, so maybe we will try to surface that. From Azmat at the Foundation for Rural Development, Osman at Ghana Developing Communities Association, from Edgar at World Vision International, from Michael at Oxfam International, and Suraj at the Corporate Breakthroughs. Just wanted to do that because if we don't get to them, we will try to share in the resources after our session. I do see as well in our chat we have questions. So, panelists, we're going to have to manage our time very carefully. I would like to perhaps start with the questions in our chat box from our chat room. The first question that I see is from Tijan, who says, do any of the panelists know whether the Cambridge Analytica scandal in the 2016 US presidential elections led to any policy changes for data protection by social media companies? Would there be any likely actions in light of the increasingly profitable surveillance capitalism market? Potentially Cassie, but of course that's open to all our panelists.
If I can start,
please, yes, go
Yvonne or Robin, if you know anything else, please add. Well, Cambridge Analytica was mostly they were collecting third-party data from Facebook. So with Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg went on like that tour around. There was legislative investigations in multiple countries. I think they did 32 countries that they had used data in. With Facebook, yes, that's when I believe probably set into motion. They closed down how third parties were able to access information and what data they were able to collect. So which friends of friends, data was possible for third parties to look at and collect. And then also Facebook now has, and again, not championing one platform versus another, but they do have a pretty comprehensive ad library, which disclaimer system. So this is a political ad, and they have pretty comprehensive rules for who's allowed to officially campaign politically. So that was an outcome. And legislatively, I think it depends on the country around the world. But with the meta products. That's what I can say.
I will just
Cassie?
say something that's more anecdotal about this. I think Cassie covered the gist of the question. So yes, obviously Facebook changed them to like what is a political ad or political messaging. But in our case, as an NGO, since the implementation of those rules, we've actually found it more difficult to put our content up without it actually being taken down. We've struggled for years. Not, I mean, on a separate platform to be verified. And some of this does seem as though it's a bit of a muzzle on civil society organizations trying to put out information. So just as an anecdotal, particularly on Facebook's implementation of those rules, we have found it really difficult to share our work when so much of our work is just about bringing political information to people.
Yes, I would also allude to that because content are not flagged as uh, political content. When you post, there was a time during the 2023 election, we wanted to sponsor some of our posts. We were not able to as a result of this regulation. But ultimately, I think each countries need to come up with policies and strategies, frameworks that would work for each country. And see how these big techs can align with that. Ultimately, we cannot have power in the hands of one person, which seems to be the case right now. Like big tech has control over some things that are not necessarily supposed to be. If we must move forward as countries, we must put frameworks and strategies in place to ensure that big tech companies protect people's data and also give access to information that are relevant rather than mining and using their platforms for political targeting.
Yeah, thank you for that, everyone. So I just want to acknowledge as well a resource shared by Maxwell Masego in the chat, contribution to a book chapter on digital transformation in Africa. So just want to bring that to everyone's attention. If you want to, I think this is the kind of platform I absolutely appreciate, where we can share resources and share resources from our partners and our panelists, as well as from those in the audience. So thanks for that, Maxwell. The next question, and what I'm keen to perhaps do now is just to look at our questions that were submitted prior to this and maybe not in the chat. I'll try to do my best to keep an eye on the time, but I'll also ask my panelists on the response to this to be like as short and sharp as they possibly can be, please. This one from Ochieng is, what are the common positive and negative effect of artificial intelligence on democratic elections? I think you've covered some of this, so perhaps if one of our speakers can cover this or jump on this, and then we can maybe target the next question. What are the common positive and negative effects of artificial intelligence on democratic elections? I will be dictatorial and ask one person to answer this, and then we'll move on to the next question. Yvonne was first hand up. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So artificial intelligence has its positives and its negative. For example, it can provide us, generate insights for us to help us make informed decision. Basically, is a data-driven platform that can help us make decisions in terms of elections, in terms of policy documents, in terms of public accountability. So I would like to say that artificial intelligence, it's a big tool that in the continent or globally, because I'm in Africa, sorry, that's why I'm talking of the continent. If we can harness it properly, it can help us to advance our democracy and also our economic growth. However, the rise of artificial intelligence we have seen would likely lead to rising misinformation and disinformation, voter suppression, political micro-targeting, and also unauthorized use of some platforms. For example, you are in a meeting and you do not know somebody is recording a sensitive conversation that is going on that can actually lead to compromise of electoral processes. And so those are some of the backdrop that we can look out for in terms of the drawbacks of artificial intelligence. However, I would like to say that to mitigate it, policies and frameworks have to also be put in place at the different level of the international body, whether at the AU in Africa, the EU in Europe, and globally, each countries must come up with frameworks that protect their citizens in terms of their human rights, in terms of how things are being done with AI, and also there's also a need for us to localize the use of AI to speak to local and to speak to issues in different continents. So when those tools are being produced, or when the learning process is going on, they are doing the machine learning on the different AI. I think languages need to be considered when they are putting things in place for that. But generally, there are biases and inequalities that comes with AI that also countries need to address. So I would like to stop there because of time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Yvonne. Yeah, and I think really great response to that. So we have time for only one more question. And this is from Edgar from World Vision International, who asks, what role does citizen-generated data play in influencing voter participation? What role does citizen-generated data play in influencing voter participation? I'm keen to hear from any of our panel on that. And if we don't have a panelist that's keen to answer it, we can pick up another question. Another question? Yes, another question. So this one speaks to, okay, so from Suraj at Corporate Breakthroughs, he says, or they say, how can we tackle the matter of disenfranchised people, most importantly, persons with intellectual or developmental and psychosocial disabilities? How can we tackle the matter of disenfranchised people, most importantly, persons with intellectual or developmental and psychosocial disabilities? I suppose that's in the context of the electorates and the voter context.
Oh, okay. Do you mind if I take the question?
Yeah, go for it, Yvonne.
Yeah. Okay. So it's very important that it's International Women's Day tomorrow, and this is Women's History Month. And most times we talk about equality, we talk about inclusion. Yeah. I think if each country put measures in place to make electoral process inclusive, nobody will be left behind. For example, in Nigeria, we have a Disability Act. So irrespective of the disability you have, the Electoral Act guarantees that you have the right to participate in the electoral process. That also helps the electoral body to prepare better, to put assistive tools in place that can help people with disabilities to participate actively in the process. For example, during voters registration, there were special queues for people with disabilities. They were attended to faster than the other demographic. Also, during election, we have hearing aids, brailles, that we had some centers for people with disability. So I think this question speaks to issues of inclusivity. Inclusivity is a very big issue that we all have to deal with across our political divides to carry everyone along, irrespective of whether you have a disability or not. You are first a human. You have a human right to participate fully in the electoral process, except the person chooses not to. So, I hope I got your question right.
Yeah.
Did I get the question?
I feel you did cover it really well. Thanks so much, Yvonne. And fantastic thanks to our entire panel. Really appreciated your inputs and appreciate the time that you've taken to prepare your inputs. Unfortunately, we have now come to the very end of our session. I know that there were many other questions, that were shared, but perhaps we can, in sharing the session recordings, share any additional resources from our panel. Our panel organizations will be sent to all participants. So to everyone who attended the session, will get links and resources from us. But also, if you can send an email, Ryan, well, we will share the information and you can send follow-up questions and so on as you need. You can also access previous dialogues of our session for on-demand viewing on the digital dialogue section of the centre's website. And I think we have enough time to just share, Ryan, if you can, share the centre's website in the chat so everyone does have access to previous dialogues and soon, very soon, this current dialogue. But wrapping up, thank you so much to our wonderful speakers. Always love a strong panel as today was. Thank you to our participants who joined and our engagement. I also want to just send a shout out to everyone who was sending positive feedback in the chat. It's always really great to join that kind of meeting. And finally, really your questions before this session, for those who weren't able to join in person, but were able to share questions. We're looking forward to sharing the answers after the fact. I think that's it from us and from our panel. Great panel. Thank you so much, everyone.